The first thing I'm going to hit on with Stanford coming up, why are these two teams rivals? I think this is a cool thing. I like it, but I just don't know where this started.
Well, Stanford and Notre Dame had played a few times over the years. I mean, I remember as a kid, a couple upsets. Denny Green and his Stanford team beat Notre Dame in 1990. That was a really good Notre Dame team that should have been better than it was. They blew a big lead against Stanford, blew a big lead against Penn State. If you remember, they beat Miami that year, who was really good. That was Rocket Ismail's last year.
And that's the Rocket Ismail clip.
Yeah, that was his last
in the Orange Bowl. Yeah.
Yes, that at the end of that game. Yep. And 92, Bill Walsh beat them. And that was actually a good Stanford team, but they didn't really become a rival until the late 90s. And essentially it came down to Notre Dame's desire to finish the season every year in California. And so what ended up happening then was they would essentially every odd year or every year, Stanford and USC would replace each other on the schedule. So when it was whoever the California team that Notre Dame was going to play, they'd play like in the fifth or sixth week in the season, so late September, usually in October, but in those years where, maybe the season starts in August, like this year, they might play a little bit sooner, but it's always usually that October period. The California team comes to South Bend, and then Notre Dame, whoever, so if they're playing Stanford at home this year, they'll play them in October, and then they'll end the season out in California, get USC. And then next year, they play USC in October, and then they'll play Stanford in California. Now, I don't know if this series is going to continue because Notre Dame and Stanford are not on the schedule with each other, I believe, beyond nenext season. I think next season, I believe, is the last year where these two teams play. I'm actually going to check that right now. But so yeah, it just kind of it came out of that. And then, of course, there's the like-minded aspects of the institutions, even though actually this year is the last year that Stanford is on the schedule, guaranteed on the schedule. The contract ends after this year, and I don't know if they're going to renew or not. But, there's we're both academic institutions. We're both, view things a little bit differently on how student athletes should be. And then, of course, your desire to finish the year in California, which made sense a while ago when, recruiting wasn't ending in December because, you're still back then, you were finishing in February. And if you remember back in the 80s and even the early 90s, Mark, recruiting, like Notre Dame would do all their recruiting after the season. They'd have their big banquet in December, and that's when all the top prospects would be in December, and then you're trying to close for February. And now it's like if you're waiting until then to hit the road, you're either, if it's the current class, you're not going to get anybody, or it's like a kid or two here, or you're going to visit committed players, or you're going to go visit kids for next year. So it's completely changed the game, and I think has sort of lessened the need for Notre Dame to finish in California every year, in my opinion. But that's where a lot of that came from.
Okay. I don't know that I've ever come across that. That kind of surprises me after all these years.
Well, when you're Notre Dame, you've got to find ways to you're not going to have a lot of natural rivals because you're an independent. And some of the rivals they had in the 80s and early 90s kind of left into being independent. The Miami and Notre Dame were kind of forming a nice little rivalry there. Penn State and, when Lou Holtz was there, Penn State and Notre Dame had some really classic games back then, the Snow Bowl and, Al Golden catching a touchdown pass to beat Notre Dame. I think it was in 90 or 91. Al Golden caught the game-winning touchdown pass, which is really ironic, from Tony Sacca, whose son, Anthony, is committed to Notre Dame in the 2025 class, which is, that's how old I am that I remember all that. But then when those teams left to go in, to join the Big East and the Big Ten, then Notre Dame's kind of stuck with USC. So, your rivalries are kind of made in different ways as opposed to sort of some of the conference rivalries or even the geographical rivalries that a lot of other teams tend to have.
So bye week, just in general, and then also applying it to Notre Dame's specific situation, what are you, from a coaching place, trying to get accomplished during the typical bye week, and then again, what may be a little bit nuanced in the Notre Dame situation?
Yeah. Well, the nuanced part for Notre Dame in this instance is get healthy. They're a very banged up team right now, and but overall, from a coaching standpoint, it depends, Mark, partly on where you are in the season. like Notre Dame's going to have a bye. They're going to play 3 games, and then they have another bye before their last 4 games. That bye week will probably be handled a little bit differently. I think for this one, it's more about, hey, we've played 5 games now. We've had some quality opponents. We've had some not so very good opponents, and looking at yourself and saying, okay, let's look at who we are as a team. Let's self-scout, because the way self-scouting tends to work in season is you've kind of got, Sunday and maybe parts of Monday to kind of look at who you are, but then you're also thinking about your opponent. During a bye week, you get to take a little extra time to self-scout, to maybe study film a little bit more. When you just finished the Miami of Ohio game and you're going to go play Louisville, you can't say, hey, man, give me all of our third down film. I'm going to spend the next 4 hours just going through our third down offense and figuring out why we're struggling in third down, because you don't have that time. Hey, I'm going to quickly look at the numbers, but, man, we got to move on and get ready for Louisville. And the bye week affords you a little bit more time for self-scouting. And I think this time of the year, after 5 games, it's a great time to really self-scout, because you've got enough data to say, hey, look, over the course of 5 games, this is what we're struggling with, or this is where we're inconsistent with, or, hey, this is what we're good at that maybe we didn't think we're going to be as good at coming into the season. So how can we be more efficient? How can we be more effective? For Notre Dame specifically, how do you get the pass game going? Look at the issues you're having in protecting the quarterback. Is it just your guys are getting beat, or there are some protection issues? A little bit of both. You identify those things. How can we teach it differently? How can we get them to understand this better? Maybe what are some changes that we need to make from the standpoint of protection? Notre Dame's had some issues where guys get beat, but you go watch them and break down the film. I mean, they're struggling with a lot of things that you shouldn't consistently. So, like, 2 things that teams are doing to Notre Dame to give them a lot of problems is they're doing a lot of line games. So they'll do like quick twists to the left side with the Anthony Knapp, Sam Pendleton side, just like little line games, slam the end, loop the tackle, slam the tackle, loop the end, that type of thing, and they're not picking it up well. To the right side, where they're a little bit more experienced, they're doing long twists, because they found some issues that the way that Notre Dame will slide and work to slants is to kind of aggressively go to the center. So they're doing a lot of long twists, and guys are coming right up the middle, and Notre Dame doesn't have to account for it. And that's happening week after week. Well, now you've got extra time to sit down and study that and say, okay, teams are doing this. What can we do to adjust our protections? Or maybe the protection is fine, but the way that we're teaching it, we're not preparing them for some of those line games. And so those are different things that you need to see from that you need some time to really study it and say, okay, how can we address it? How can we fix it? And how can we get it going? And then, of course, once you protect the quarterback better, how can we get the throwing game better from a quarterback standpoint, from a receiver standpoint, and all those things? You've got 5 games under Riley Leonard now. What's he good at? What's he not good at? And then how do you adapt your offense to fit that? Those are all parts of what you do during a bye week. And I'm a big fan of that at this time of year, Mark, as opposed to, okay, let's spend 3-4 extra days putting in some new stuff to go get Stanford. I don't think that may help you beat Stanford, but I don't think that helps you improve in the long run. I think a really good period of self-scouting, fixing some technical issues, and just how's our lineup, those type of things I think are way better for this period of time than maybe doing some extra stuff to beat Stanford.
I saw some of, but very little of the Stanford opening night game against TCU. They lost by a touchdown. They were generally outclassed in that game, lost by a touchdown. Did see the Syracuse game. I was fascinated by Stanford, first ACC game, having to come cross country, of course, take on Syracuse. It was a Friday night game, entertaining ball game. Why Syracuse? The coach, the time management portion of the game for Syracuse at the end was mind-boggling. But there was another game on at the same time, so I'm watching 2 games, so I'm not completely locked in on this. But Ashton Daniels, how does he strike you? Because to me, again, I've seen him play here and there, probably a quarter here and a quarter there over the course of the last couple seasons, generally. And that may have been my longest look at him. He strikes me as the typical decent-sized athlete at quarterback, can play on this level from the standpoint of has a strong enough arm, very mobile, athletic guy, doesn't necessarily have the polish on the engine at this point. But that's kind of how he strikes me as kind of a rough product right now.
I mean, I think that's fair. I just think that's gonna always be a little bit who he is. He's never going to be a guy that's going to go out there and complete 68% of his passes consistently. I mean, you look at him this year, he's averaging 59, completing 59% of his passes, 5.5 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. The 5.5 yards per attempt, that's not that much further off of what Notre Dame's doing right now. But, the completion percentage is lower. The turnovers are there. He's a good runner, but he's not a take a game over against a good team type of runner. He's more of a scrambler, and they've got some really good stuff they do scheme wise that gets them some opportunities. One of the things I like about Troy Taylor is he knows who Ashton Daniels is, and their game plan is geared towards playing to his strengths. So they do a lot of different things with their backfield action to kind of create let's slow the defense down. They're not sure where the ball's going, and then take some shots and they're not asking him to drop back and go through all these full field reads and hit backside dig cuts and things like that, because that's not who he is. He's just a kind of a playmaker that you've got to protect a little bit, and that's where they are at this point in time with him, and he's really the best they have, because if you watched any of the Virginia Tech game when he didn't play, they were a way different offense when he's not in the game, because Lamson can run, but he can't throw at all. But that's who he is. But the thing I like about Ashton Daniels, he's got a bit of poor man's Jordan Travis to his game. He's not as skilled as Jordan Travis was. But if you remember back when Jordan Travis first kind of stepped into the lineup at Florida State, he'd go 12 of 26 and impact the game, because he'd scramble around and make people miss, and it's 3rd and 9, and he drops back and he spins out and then makes that guy miss. Next thing you know, he's diving for a first down and moving the chains. Or, he'd throw 3 balls in a row. You're like, oh, that was ugly. And then just drop a post over top for a touchdown for 50. He just was a playmaker, and he evolved and became more efficient. He got older. Ashton Daniels has some of that to his game. He's just not as good at it. You know what I mean? And just not as dynamic at as what Jordan Travis was. But he brings that. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be something NFL scouts are like drooling over his athleticism or his size or his arm. It's a quality playmaker. And we saw against Virginia Tech when he's not in the lineup, it looks way different than when he is in the lineup. And so that's what he brings to the table. And if you're not disciplined, he can hurt you.
So when you look at the entire team, and of course, big number 13 out there on the outside is a man. And I think I discovered him at the same time that most people did when they played Colorado last year, and he went off in the second half and led that big comeback that they had in overtime. When you look at the full complement on offense and defense, does Stanford pose too many concerns?
I mean, sure. Look, they had a worse team in 2022, and that team came to Notre Dame and beat Notre Dame. I mean, think about it. They had the only win they were 1-4. And their only win was over Colgate in 2022. This year, look, even Clemson, who beat them convincingly, they battled Clemson. I mean, you could watch that game. They just don't have the athletes against Clemson overall, but they compete. And they're very well coached. They're schemed very well. They just don't have, defensively, they're actually pretty well coached. They just don't have athletes on the back end. And it hurts them. But they've got a couple guys you've got to be concerned about. And Alec Manor is obviously one of those guys. And, you like to look back at the evaluations you make, and I got that one right. I nailed that one. I knew what that kid was going to be. I remember watching him, and Notre Dame was looking at him, and I was like, I'm good if they don't want to take him. He's solid. If they take him, I'm cool with that. If they pass on him, I'm cool with that too. I didn't see what he became. So you get some right, and then you're going to get some wrong, and this is one of those kids that I got wrong. He's turned out to be a far more impactful down the field. I always thought he could be a good possession guy, but Notre Dame had enough possession guys. His ability to stretch the field and make big plays is really something that I didn't see on high school film, and he's turned out to be quite a find for the Cardinal. And if they had a better throwing quarterback, his numbers would be even more impressive.
Talking Notre Dame football as we do each and every Wednesday night here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Bring a friend or 2 or 50 with you every week as we talk Irish with Brian Driscoll from Irish Breakdown. And again, that is really your destination on a daily basis. But I get to steal Brian for half hour, 60 minutes, whatever we do here on Wednesday nights. And so I appreciate that. And we got Notre Dame, Stanford. We got the Irish at 4-1, 5-1,
4-1,
4-1
Yep.
with the one bye week prior. And so we're hitting the halfway mark with this sixth game, and then the stretch drive with 6 more games. So I should probably ask this next week, but I'm going to throw it at you this week as kind of a mid-season deal. What is different about Notre Dame football in the final half of the season than the first half of the season with reasonable, optimistic expectations? What has to be better that this team is capable of? We're not going to make them the 78 Steelers,
right?
That would be their best version of them to make a run at this.
With some of this, we actually talked about a little bit today, more looking at Stanford, but it applies to the remainder of the season. Look, your offensive line is not going to look like the 2017 offensive line at any point in time this season. You don't have Charles Jagasol. Ashton Craig's out for the year. They're eventually going to get Billy Schrauth back. How much of a difference will that make? How much better will he be with the new look line? That's all up for debate. But this line has to be more consistently effective. It doesn't have to be dominant. It just needs to do its job more consistently. And I mean, Mark, you've seen it when you watch Notre Dame play. You don't have to open up giant holes for Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, and Jadarian Price. You just got to let them get to the second level. And Texas A&M found this out. Even Northern Illinois found it out the one time they got to the second level. Purdue found it out a lot. Miami of Ohio found it out. Louisville found it out. When Leonard, Love, or Price get into the second level, they're dynamic in space and they can hit home runs. They don't need giant holes. They don't need you to drive people off the ball. They just need you to get a body on a body. And when you do that, this team is really good running the football. And the same thing in the throwing game. Riley Leonard still got a lot of work to do, but if you go back and study his last 3 games, especially the Miami and the Louisville game, after a rough first 2 series, he started processing a lot better. I mean, there was 2 plays where he reads right. He's got a slot fade concept. It's covered. They're coming over. He comes all the way to a backside dig and bangs the backside dig. He had 0 chance of completing that ball the first 3 games of the season. And it's like, okay, so don't miss these 2 throws that you've got to make. And then against Louisville, he was going through his reads early, getting the ball out. He had the big touchdown pass to Jaden Greathouse. Then next thing you know, he's getting drilled. I mean, there's a play where it's literally a catch and throw, Mark. He catches it and he gets ready to throw it on a quick outcut to Bo Collins, and he gets drilled. Ball goes flying. And you're just like, you can't even protect the guy in quick game. Like, that's a problem. And so they've got to clean that up. If the offensive line can just play consistently solid football, this offense will be a lot better. How much better? That's going to then be determined by what does Riley Leonard do? What do the receivers do with that additional time? But the run game is going to be good. And then ironically, defensively, it's the veterans have to play better. Which is kind of wild to say, but like Howard Cross, and as Notre Dame has the number 1 ranked defense in college football on the Fermo Efficiency Index. There's one other efficiency data guy that has them number 1. ESPN's FPI thing has them number 3. And you think about it, Riley Mills hasn't played very well. Howard Cross hasn't played very well. Jack Kaiser hasn't played very well. Benjamin Morrison's been good, but hasn't been elite. And yet they're still dominant. Why? Because the young players are really playing at a high level. So when you talk about what's a reasonable expectation, here's a thought: get the veterans to get to play like they've done in the past, like Riley Mills and Howard Cross. I don't need you to play like Mason Graham. I just need you to be what you were last year. Benjamin Morrison, you just shake off the rust from missing all the spring. Rod Hurd, who's a transfer, struggled a little bit with the transition from nickel at Northwestern to safety. He's coming off his best game. There's room for improvement for him. RJ Oben's been a big disappointment at defensive end. Can he get back to what he was at Duke? It really comes down to this defense takes another jump if the veterans start playing like we've seen them play in the past, which is not what I thought I'd be saying when the season started. I'd be like, well, you just need the young guys to step up. And Christian Gray's been great. Don Schuler's been great. The linebackers are playing outstanding football. You had Boubacar Traore who stepped up and was dominant before he got hurt. it's the veterans got to step up and play better. And if they do that, this defense becomes really scary good because they're already very good now. I mean, their worst performance so far, I would argue, was a game in which they gave up 16 points. I mean, they gave up 24 points to Louisville. Louisville had 2 touchdown drives that covered a grand total of, what was it, 31 yards? Because they had a 24-yard touchdown drive and then a 33 and then a 9-yard touchdown drive off of turnover fumbles, and still held them to 24 points. And it's a really, really good defense, but it can get better, and it needs to get better.